Hey, it's Chris. Today we're taking another look at the iPad Pro versus the brand new MacBook Air. Now, I've done this comparison before. It's been a while and it was really popular. People are super interested in comparing these two devices, probably because the size is similar, the pricing can be similar depending on the configurations. Now, partly the reason why I'm doing this right now, even though a new iPad Pro is imminent, is because, you know what? I want to benchmark it. I want to see how these compare now and how things change when the new iPad actually arrives. And on top of that, I want to do things a little bit different today. Instead of just comparing the specs, which we all know about, I want to go task by task and tell you what task I prefer on which device and why, and see if that changes when the new iPad comes out. So we're going to kind of benchmark. Let's start with something that applies to everybody, and that would be web browsing and doing research. Now, let me just start by saying that things are going to be different depending on the situation. If I'm just relaxing on the couch and I want to rip this iPad off and take it with me and go relax, it's a great way to consume. But what I'll say is that's great for casual. When I'm doing serious browsing, I prefer to download the Arc browser for the Mac. There's a companion app for the iPad. It's just not the same. It's not as good. It takes browsing to a whole new level. So it really does come down to navigation ease. You've got this nice touch screen over here, and that is great, but you've got power over here. Power for multitasking just due to the apps that you just don't have over on the iPad. So personally, if I had to pick one, I'm probably gonna pick the Mac in this category. The iPad Pro, of course, has a liquid retina display with ProMotion and a 4-speaker audio setup. The MacBook Air has a retina display with stereo speakers. You know, both of these look really good. The iPad Pro, of course, with that mini LED display is great, so good. You can't really notice a huge difference in a lot of content though between these two. Form factor wise, you just have more options over on the iPad Pro. You can rip off the screen and you can go relax in a chair, on the couch, in bed. And then when you're done, you can come back and get basically the same form factor as you have with the Mac. So really all points in this category have to go to the iPad. Okay, let's talk a little bit about productivity and just kind of normal office tasks. So being efficient, taking notes, sending emails, working with your calendar, freeform, all that kind of stuff. This is a tough one, maybe the toughest one, because there's some trade-offs here. Yes, you have the Apple Pencil. Yes, that's great, and you can work in different ways on the iPad Pro versus the Mac. However, and this is a big however, you're gonna get different sorts of apps to deal with and a different workflow than over on the Mac, and oftentimes it's just more powerful. It doesn't have to be the MacBook Pro, but it's the apps and the app types and the versions of apps that make the Mac experience maybe able to do what you could call more heavy lifting for your workflow. Now, it's not necessarily about raw power, but it's just the way that certain apps work, even after all these years. Still, the Mac has more robust versions. Now, that said, for my kind of work, the style of things that I do, I prefer the iPad Pro just because I make heavy use of the Apple Pencil, number one. But one of the businesses that I am involved with, we use Microsoft Teams, and that's how everyone shares files and collaborates. And that's pretty similar on both devices. So from a business perspective, I can really do what I need to do with either of these. But for light computing sort of everyday tasks, I do prefer the transformer ability of the iPad Pro here and its multi-form factor functionality over the MacBook. That said, for heavier duty tasks like maybe graphic design or photo editing, there's just more power at the moment with the chip that's inside of the new MacBook Air. And so the iPad Pro in this video, it's aging, it's old, it's very powerful. You know, if you're into Adobe's Creative Suite, which is way overpriced and I hate the subscription, but if you need that suite of apps, you get the full version over here, whereas you get kind of a nerfed version over on the iPad, and you're probably gonna end up using something more like Canva or Affinity Designer versus, you know, what you might call the industry standard sort of suite of apps. So I gotta be honest, when I'm doing something like designing a YouTube thumbnail, you would think I would do that on the iPad Pro, wouldn't you? And sometimes I do. But most of the time, I'm doing that in Photoshop, full Photoshop over here on the Mac. I would say it's not that I couldn't do most sorts of design or creative work on either of these devices, but what's different is usually the workflow. So I can launch Final Cut Pro over here and get some serious video editing done, no problem, with some special features because there's some cool animation effects where I can use the Apple Pencil to draw and it animates, and I can't do that over on the Mac. And actually, as happens, oftentimes it's better to have both devices, but I'm not gonna get into that because that's not what this video is meant to be about. But to be honest, I can edit faster over here, and I can make use of Adobe Premiere Pro and Final Cut Pro and some other apps, compressor and whatnot, which just gives me a more robust, more professional, in many ways, workflow. And that's really important. So for like video editing and that sort of stuff, I absolutely pick the Mac. For so many things, it comes down to plugins. I don't care if it's web browsing and you need Chrome and you need to make use of the plugin ecosystem there, or creative apps and you need to make use of plugins there like Autopod, which lets you edit, a 2-3 hour podcast in like 10 seconds because the AI can go in and change the camera angles and stuff, and then you just have to supervise it. There's so much that you can do on a Mac that you still just can't do on the iPad. It just lags in the development and plugin department massively. Now we're just about to get into note taking, but real quick, let me just mention, if you haven't taken the productivity course yet, join almost 1,000 people who love it. But also, there's a new course that you can pre-order right now called Freeform Unleashed, which is going to teach you how to go way beyond the basics in Freeform. Now's the time to check it out because you get 50% off the pre-sale for the launch. This comes out in just about a month. And holy cow, the more I work on it, the more I'm excited to share it with you. I'm putting the finishing touches on right now, and this thing is useful. Well, let's talk a little bit about Freeform because I use it heavily. It's one of my main go-to apps. I use it on the Mac, I use it on the iPad, I use it on my iPhone, but I use it the most on the iPad because it's really more of a reference thing for me on the Mac, especially if I throw it up on a big screen, some of the boards that I've been working with. But on the iPad, because it's so multimodal and because I can use my fingers and my Apple Pencil, it's by far the place that I prefer to get things done in Freeform. Now, I just made a video recently talking about sort of turning the iPad Pro into more of a remarkable like digital paper sort of a tablet for productivity reasons. It was an experiment. You can go check that out. But what I mentioned in that video is that there's definitely something about handwriting your notes that helps you remember things better. There's actually several reasons why you might want to handwrite things. And so obviously note-taking works great on both of these devices, but just for the flexibility, I'm 1,000% gonna say iPad wins this hands down. All right, next let's talk about PDFs. Here I have financial services and government appropriations bill going here just because it's enormous and it's a good example of a PDF that you can annotate. Now you could consider this also something like e-reading. So if you're into reading content, whether that's a book or a PDF, then this section covers both. There are some very powerful PDF apps on both of these platforms. And so in terms of features and capabilities, that's very similar. However, I absolutely pick the iPad Pro in this category as well, especially for annotations, because you have the Apple Pencil and you can get in there and use this very quickly and easily without having to select a specific tool and make a sticky note somewhere or something. You can just get in and write. I use this for filling out forms all the time. When it was tax time and I had to fill out a bunch of forms, went straight to the iPad Pro. Could have done it on the Mac, but I didn't. I chose the iPad Pro, and there's a reason. The Apple Pencil, the touchscreen interface, makes all the difference in the world. What about FaceTime and video calls? This is something that people use both of these for all the time. Zoom meetings, FaceTiming family, whatever it may be. I got a winner here as well, and it's clear as day for me, and it really has nothing to do with the specs or the features, camera placement. People are annoyed with camera placement at the moment. Hope that gets fixed with the next one. But the iPad wins again in this department for me because I like to take this off and put it on a floor-mounted iPad stand that lets me basically stand up and feel like I'm talking to a person on the other end. And that's so easy to do here. Plus, I can bring that back here and also have the exact same form factor as the Mac practically. So it's like the Mac Plus. Now, the fact that I can rip this off and mount it other places, that comes in handy all the time, unlike the Mac. So if I'm doing a video, I can mount, and I do this sometimes, several iPads up and use those as monitors so I can see what all the different camera angles look like. I can't do that with the Mac. And while we're at it, another thing you can't do with this is film. Now, I know it's an unpopular thing to say, but you can take your iPad, mount it, film with the back camera in very good quality, right? Yes, it's a big screen, but this works great if you're doing like a YouTube video or something. You're not out in public where people are gonna make fun of you. Film, edit, publish, all from the same device without having to import anything. That can be a really powerful workflow as well, something that you can't do on the Mac. So you can see it really depends on the context here, doesn't it? It's not that there's necessarily a winner overall across the board for everything. So there you go. There's a task by task breakdown of some of my preferences and the reasons why I prefer one device over the other. I really want to know what your thoughts are, why you're considering one over the other, what you're hoping the new iPad Pro brings. that maybe changes the equation and the math for you, and the price considerations, let me know all of that stuff down in the comments. Thanks for hanging out. If you like the wallpapers, those are linked up down in the description. This is Hypernova, definitely the best seller by far, but there's some other great ones you can check out, including some freebies. And again, don't forget to check out Freeform Unleashed. This thing is going to be awesome, and it's not gonna waste your time. You'll be able to get in and get out with so many fresh ideas in no time flat. Thanks for hanging out today, and I'll catch you in the next video. Later.